We live in a time of endless noise. Notifications never stop, schedules overflow, and even when the world grows quiet at night, the mind rarely rests. Many of us lie awake, thoughts racing through regrets of the past or worries about tomorrow. We try to push away the pain with distraction. We chase temporary highs. We tell ourselves to just be happy, but deep down we know it doesn't work. Stress returns, loneliness lingers, and the cycle repeats. Beneath the surface of modern life runs an undercurrent of anxiety, restlessness, and quiet despair. It is not that we lack comfort or convenience. It is that something within us is unsettled, unsatisfied, and endlessly searching. This is not a personal weakness. It is the common story of our age. The pressure to succeed, to look perfect, to keep moving faster each day, these forces shape the lives of millions. And yet, when we meet them honestly, we see they all point to a deeper truth. The suffering does not only come from the world outside us, but from how we relate to our own minds. The restless thoughts, the harsh self-criticism, the constant craving for something different, these create the prison walls we live within. It is no wonder so many feel trapped. No wonder peace feels so far away. But there is another way. Long before our modern struggles, human beings faced the same storms of the heart. Thousands of years ago, wise teachers looked directly into the nature of suffering and discovered that freedom was possible, not by escaping life, but by transforming how we meet it. Their path was not about blind belief or rigid dogma, but about practice, awareness, and compassion. It offered not quick fixes, but lasting change, the kind that begins in the quiet space within and ripples outward into every corner of life. This journey is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering what has always been here, the capacity for stillness, clarity, and love that no fear can destroy. You do not need to abandon your world, your work, or your family. What you need is a different way of seeing, a shift so subtle yet so profound that it can turn your pain into a doorway. The teachings we are about to explore are not distant philosophy. They are living medicine, as relevant in a crowded subway or a late-night office as they were in ancient forests and monasteries. They speak to the human heart, to your heart, exactly as it is right now. As you listen, you may recognize pieces of your own life in these words. The stress you carry, the anger you hide, the emptiness you try to fill. Let them be seen. Let them be honored. And then, together, let us walk step by step into the wisdom that shows suffering is not the end of the story. Each pain you feel can become a teacher. Each fear can open into compassion. Each restless night can lead you closer to a freedom that does not depend on circumstances. This is not a promise of an easy life. It is the promise of a truer one. And as we move forward, part by part, you will see that the path is already here beneath your feet. There comes a moment in nearly every life when silence feels impossible. You sit in your living room after a long day, the television muted, the phone finally put down, and for the first time in hours, there is no distraction. Yet instead of peace, an uneasy tide rises. Old conversations replay themselves. Regrets whisper. Fears about the future stand in line, each demanding attention. The body grows restless, the mind spins, and you wonder, why is it so hard to simply be? For years, society has told us that emotions are obstacles to be conquered. Think positive, they say. Don't let it get to you. The slogans appear on coffee mugs, in corporate seminars, even in the quiet encouragements of friends who mean well. And yet, behind the forced smiles and polished appearances, countless people are breaking inside. Anxiety chews at the edges of even the most successful careers. Loneliness creeps into marriages and friendships. Depression disguises itself behind the achievements we post online. If positivity were enough, we would all be free by now. But we are not. The truth is both more difficult and more liberating. Your emotions are not the enemy. They are not broken pieces that need fixing, nor storms that must be silenced. The real struggle comes from the way we meet them, the way we tighten against fear, bury grief, or judge anger as weakness. In doing so, we turn our inner world into a battlefield. And battles, as you already know, are exhausting. Imagine standing on the shore of an ocean. Waves rise and fall, each one unique. Some are gentle, lapping softly against your feet. Others crash with force, pulling at your balance. You cannot control their rhythm, nor can you command the sea to be still. But you can choose how you stand. You can fight the waves and be knocked down again and again. Or you can learn to float, to ride them, to trust that even the strongest wave will eventually pass. This is the quiet revolution, shifting from control to acceptance, from resistance to presence. This revolution does not happen in a burst of fireworks. It is subtle. At first, it may feel like nothing at all. You sit with sadness, and instead of trying to escape, you allow it to breathe. You notice the weight in your chest, the slow pull in your shoulders, the heaviness behind your eyes. You resist the urge to label it bad or wrong. You simply notice. And in that noticing, something shifts. The sadness does not vanish, but its grip loosens. It becomes one wave among many, not the entire ocean. In a culture obsessed with speed, this kind of slowing down feels radical. We are trained to fix, to optimize, to hack our way to happiness. But the deepest healing is not a hack. It is a practice of presence, a willingness to stop running and instead turn toward the very feelings we fear. This is not passive resignation. It is courageous attention. To sit quietly with yourself without fleeing into distraction is one of the bravest acts of modern life. Why does this matter? Because the alternative is endless exhaustion. When you run from fear, it follows. When you bury grief, it waits. When you deny anger, it festers. Every unacknowledged emotion becomes a shadow that drains your energy. But when you face them, when you create space for them, they transform. The shadow becomes a teacher. The pain becomes a doorway. And through that doorway lies freedom, not freedom from feeling, but freedom from being controlled by feeling. Picture a man stuck in traffic after a long day. His chest tightens, thoughts race. I'll be late again. My boss will notice. I can't keep living like this. The stress rises, not only from the traffic itself, but from the story he tells himself about it. Now imagine the same moment with a different approach. He notices the tension in his chest. He takes one breath, then another. He sees the cars, the red lights, the rain on the windshield. He does not fight the frustration, but he does not feed it either. He is still in traffic, but he is no longer drowning in it. That small shift between being swallowed by emotion and simply witnessing, it changes everything. This way of living is not reserved for monks in distant monasteries. It belongs to anyone willing to pause. Mothers carrying the weight of family worries. Students overwhelmed by exams and uncertainty. Workers stretched thin by endless deadlines. Retirees staring at quiet houses filled with memories. Every one of them can find refuge in this revolution. All it asks is presence. All it offers is freedom. The quiet revolution is not about suppressing emotions, nor is it about indulging in them endlessly. It is about changing the relationship. Instead of enemy, they become guide. Instead of chain, they become key. You learn that sadness can deepen compassion. Fear can sharpen clarity. Anger can awaken courage. Every feeling holds a message, and when met with awareness, every message points toward life lived more fully. At first, you may doubt this. The mind insists that control is safer. It whispers that if you ignore the waves, if you push hard enough, eventually the sea will obey. But the longer you live, the more you see it is not true. The sea does not obey. The waves do not stop. What can change, what must change, is the way you meet them. This shift does not remove life's challenges, but it changes your posture within them. You no longer brace against every storm. You begin to trust that you can weather them. And that trust, once discovered, is unshakable. As this journey begins, remember that you are not alone. Across generations and cultures, countless seekers have walked this same path. They too have known sleepless nights and restless minds. They too have searched for something beyond fleeting comfort. And they too have found that the revolution begins not in the world outside, but in the stillness within. You are joining a lineage of courage, a community of souls who dared to meet their own hearts with compassion. And so, let this be your invitation. The invitation to pause, to listen, to soften the war you have waged against your own feelings. The invitation to begin again, not by erasing your story, but by meeting it with new eyes. The invitation to ride the waves instead of drowning beneath them. This is the doorway to freedom. Step through, and everything changes. When you begin to shift the way you relate to emotions, the first discovery is subtle but powerful. Space appears. The sadness you once believed would crush you reveals itself as passing clouds. The anger you thought defined you becomes a momentary flame, not a permanent fire. The anxiety that once felt like a prison turns into a set of sensations: tightness in the stomach, quickened breath, racing thoughts that rise and fade like weather. What once seemed like identity becomes simply experience. And in that space, you find choice. Choice is the true gift of awareness. Without it, we live on autopilot, reacting to every trigger, replaying the same stories over and over. With it, we see that no emotion has the final word. You may feel anger, but you are not anger. You may feel fear, but you are not fear. You are the awareness that notices, the witness that holds, a sky vast enough for every storm. This realization does not come as a grand epiphany. It arrives in small, steady moments of choosing to breathe instead of lash out, to listen instead of argue, to sit instead of flee. Think of a woman who has carried grief for years. She lost someone dear, and though time has passed, the pain still rises like a tide. For so long she fought it, telling herself she should be over it by now. Each wave of sorrow felt like failure, proof that healing would never come. Then one day, she tries something different. She lets the grief speak. She feels the ache in her chest without judgment. She allows the tears to fall without apology. And as she does, she notices the grief softens. It is no longer an enemy, but a companion, a reminder of love that still lives in her. She has not erased the loss, but she has transformed her relationship to it. That is freedom. This freedom does not mean you no longer feel pain. Pain is part of being alive. What changes is the way pain rules you. In the old way, suffering is multiplied. The first wound comes from life itself, the second from the resistance we had. In the new way, pain remains, but suffering lessens. You no longer stab yourself with the second arrow. You hold the wound with care, and in that care, healing begins. The revolution within asks for patience. The modern world trains us to demand results quickly. If a problem arises, we look for an app, a shortcut, a fix delivered overnight. But the heart is not a machine. It moves at the pace of breath, of seasons, of tides. To retrain your relationship with emotions is to walk a path that unfolds step by step, often without visible markers. Some days you will feel progress, other days you will feel lost. Yet every time you pause instead of react, every time you allow instead of suppress, you plant a seed. Over time, those seeds grow into resilience, compassion, and peace. It helps to remember that no wave is permanent. Even the strongest storm must pass. Science confirms what ancient wisdom taught. Emotions are temporary states, not permanent fixtures. On average, an emotion in its pure physical form lasts less than 90 seconds. What prolongs it are the stories we attach, the judgments we feed, the mental loops we repeat. When you learn to separate the raw sensation from the endless narrative, you discover how quickly the body can let go. The chest tightens, the heart races, the breath shortens, and then, if given space, the body relaxes again. But if you add the story, this always happens. I'll never escape this. Something must be wrong with me, the storm lingers. The revolution is in breaking that cycle. Consider how this plays out in ordinary life. A teenager receives a poor grade on an exam. At first, there is the sting of disappointment, the first arrow. But soon, the second arrow arrives. I'm stupid. I'll never succeed. My parents will be ashamed. The weight of those thoughts crushes far more than the grade itself. Now imagine if she pauses. She acknowledges the disappointment. She feels the knot in her stomach. She names it as sadness, perhaps frustration. But she does not spiral into judgment. She sees it as one moment, not her entire future. In doing so, she gives herself space to study again, to try again, to move forward with less burden. This is how transformation enters the smallest corners of life. The quiet revolution is not only for moments of crisis. It is for the everyday. It is for the morning commute when someone cuts you off in traffic, for the awkward silence in a meeting, for the unexpected bill in the mail, for the loneliness of scrolling through photos of other people's perfect lives. Each moment offers the same choice: resist and multiply suffering, or pause and allow. Again and again, presence restores peace. Some resist this teaching, afraid that acceptance will make them passive. If I just accept my feelings, they say, won't I become weak? Won't I stop fighting for change? But the truth is the opposite. Acceptance is not weakness. It is clarity. When you are no longer drowning in the flood of emotion, you can see the situation more clearly. You can respond with wisdom instead of reflex. You can act with courage instead of panic. The revolution within does not remove your power. It multiplies it. Imagine a firefighter entering a burning building. Panic would be natural, but it would also be dangerous. What saves lives is not the absence of fear, but the ability to feel fear without being ruled by it. The firefighter feels the heat, hears the crack of collapsing beams, but breathes, focuses, chooses each step with care. In the same way, when you meet your emotions with presence, you become capable of meeting life with courage. You are no longer pushed around by the storm inside. You stand in the fire and still choose your path. As this first chapter closes, carry this truth with you. Your emotions are not proof of weakness. They are proof of humanity. They are not barriers to freedom. They are the very path to it. The revolution within begins not by erasing what you feel, but by turning toward it with gentleness. Every wave you meet without resistance strengthens your ability to live fully. Every moment of awareness is a step out of prison and into freedom. And from here, the journey deepens. If emotions are not the enemy, then what multiplies our suffering? Why do small wounds so often grow into heavy burdens? The answer lies in the story of the second arrow, a story as old as time, and one that reveals how much of our pain is self-inflicted and how easily we can lay down the bow. There is an ancient teaching that begins with a simple image. A man walking through the forest is struck by an arrow. The pain is sharp, immediate, unavoidable. This is the first arrow. Life itself will always carry these arrows: loss, illness, rejection, mistakes, disappointments. No one escapes them. The pain of the first arrow is real, but it is only the beginning. What happens next is the greater tragedy. The man, instead of treating the wound, picks up another arrow and drives it into himself. He curses his fate. He blames others. He tells himself he is weak, unlucky, or broken. This second arrow is unnecessary, yet it cuts deeper than the first. And in truth, most of our suffering comes not from the first arrow, but from the second. Think about your own life. The first arrow may have been a breakup, a lost job, a harsh word from someone you trusted. Those moments hurt, and they should. Pain is part of being alive. But then came the second arrow. I am unlovable. I'll never succeed. People always leave me. I'm worthless. The wound doubled. The mind, desperate to explain the pain, created stories that turned hurt into identity. Instead of bleeding from one cut, we stab ourselves again and again with thoughts that imprison us. The tragedy of the second arrow is how invisible it becomes. Many people do not even realize they are holding the bow. They assume the suffering is inevitable, that the pain is proof of life's cruelty, when in truth much of it is self-created. The first arrow may be sharp, but it is brief. The second arrow lingers for years. Some carry wounds decades old, not from what happened, but from what they told themselves afterward. The lost love still haunts them. A failure still defines them. The cruel word still echoes, though the speaker long forgot it. These ghosts are second arrows, living rent-free in the mind. Imagine a young boy embarrassed in front of his classmates. He stumbles over his words. They laugh, his cheeks burn. That is the first arrow. But then he tells himself, I am stupid. I should never speak up again. That belief follows him into adulthood. He avoids public speaking, avoids sharing ideas, avoids being seen. His life shrinks, not because of the laughter long ago, but because of the second arrow he drove into himself. Or consider the woman who loses her job. The first arrow is the loss itself, the shock and uncertainty. But soon the second arrow comes. I'm a failure. I will never find stability again. Fear multiplies, self-doubt deepens, and opportunities are missed because she has already decided she is unworthy. The wound festers not because of the job, but because of the story. The good news, the liberating truth, is that the second arrow is optional. You may not choose whether life sends you the first, but you can choose whether to fire the second. This choice begins with awareness. The moment you hear the mind whispering, this always happens. I'm broken. I'll never recover. You pause. You notice that this is not the wound itself, but the story about the wound. And with that awareness, you can set down the bow. This does not mean pretending the first arrow did not hurt. Denial is just another arrow. True healing begins by acknowledging the pain fully. You lost someone you loved. You failed at something important. You were betrayed. These hurts matter. To ignore them would be dishonest. But once acknowledged, the work is to stop multiplying the pain, to feel the wound without stabbing yourself further, to say, this hurts, without adding, and therefore I am ruined. Think of the body's wisdom. When you cut your hand, the skin immediately begins to heal. Cells rush to repair, blood clots to protect, tissues knit together. The body does not dwell on how unfair the injury was. It does not decide the cut defines the whole person. It simply heals. The mind, however, often refuses to do the same. It picks at the wound, tells stories about it, ensures it never closes. The practice of laying down the second arrow is learning to let the mind follow the body's wisdom. Acknowledge, tend, and then allow healing in everyday life. The second arrow shows up in countless small ways. You spill coffee on your shirt before a meeting. The first arrow, annoyance, inconvenience. The second arrow, I look ridiculous. Everyone will judge me. I always mess things up. You receive a curt email from your boss. The first arrow, discomfort, maybe worry. The second arrow, I'm going to be fired. I'm not respected. I'll never get ahead. These small wounds accumulate, shaping the entire tone of your days. But when you learn to notice the second arrow, you reclaim your freedom. You laugh at the coffee stain, you breathe before reacting to the email. Life remains imperfect, but your suffering lessens. One way to disarm the second arrow is through mindful language. Instead of saying, I am anxious, say, anxiety is here. Instead of, I am angry, say, anger is rising. This small shift reminds you that emotions are experiences, not identities. You are not the arrow. You are the one who feels it. And in that distance lies freedom. Another way is compassion. When the second arrow whispers cruel words, I am worthless, I am broken, meet it with kindness. Say instead, this is pain, and I am human. And being human means sometimes I hurt. Compassion does not erase the wound, but it softens the edges. It allows healing where judgment only deepens the cut. As you begin to see the second arrow, life changes. You no longer fear pain in the same way. You know you cannot avoid the first arrow, but you also know you do not need to destroy yourself with the second. This brings courage. You take risks, speak your truth, love fully, because you trust that while pain may come, you no longer have to multiply it. The story of the two arrows is not abstract philosophy. It is the daily choice between spiraling into self-created suffering or resting in awareness. It is the choice to notice when you are picking up the bow. And each time you lay it down, you walk one step closer to freedom. And yet, you may wonder, how do we actually catch ourselves in the act? How do we notice the split second between the first arrow and the second? The answer lies in discovering the sacred pause, the hidden space where transformation is possible. The distance between the first arrow and the second is often no more than a breath. Something happens, pain arises, and before we know it, the mind is busy weaving its story. That breath, that tiny space, is the doorway to freedom. If we can recognize it, even for a moment, we can interrupt the cycle that multiplies suffering. Take, for example, a father who comes home after a long day of work. He hopes for a peaceful evening, but the house is messy, the children are loud, and his patience is thin. The first arrow is the chaos. He walks into the noise, the exhaustion, the unmet desire for rest. The second arrow is the voice in his head. I can't handle this. My family doesn't respect me. I'm trapped in a life I don't want. Without awareness, frustration turns into anger, anger into harsh words, and soon everyone is wounded. But if he notices the moment, if he takes even one mindful breath, he can pause. He can see the chaos for what it is, life happening, children being children. The first arrow still stings, but he no longer fires the second. Instead of escalating, he softens. Instead of attacking, he breathes. That single breath changes the whole evening. The practice of noticing the second arrow is like training a muscle. At first, it feels impossible. The mind is quick, slippery, always ready with its stories. But with practice, the gap between the first and second arrow becomes clearer. Meditation, journaling, mindful breathing, all of these are ways of strengthening the muscle of awareness. The more you practice, the more often you catch yourself in the act of reaching for the bow. Imagine a woman who has always feared rejection. When a friend cancels plans, the first arrow is disappointment. The second arrow is the old story. She doesn't really care about me. People always leave, but after months of practicing awareness, she pauses. She sees the familiar pattern beginning. She notices the thoughts rising, but does not attach to them. She reminds herself, this is just disappointment, nothing more. For the first time, she feels the sting without the spiral. And in that moment, she is free. What makes the second arrow so destructive is not only the pain it adds, but the identity it creates. The stories we tell ourselves become labels. I am unworthy. I am unlucky. I am broken. Over time, these labels harden into self-image, shaping the way we see every event. If I believe I am unworthy, I interpret every interaction as proof. If I believe I am unlucky, I see every setback as fate. The second arrow builds a prison where the walls are made of words. But when you begin to disarm the second arrow, those walls crumble. You see that you are not your stories. You are not the sum of your wounds. You are larger, freer, more resilient than the mind wants you to believe. You are the sky, not the storm. Consider the body again. Pain is inevitable. You touch something hot, you pull your hand away. You twist an ankle, you limp until it heals. The body responds, then recovers. The mind, though, rarely stops at response. It builds narratives. I'll always be clumsy. Why does this happen to me? My body is failing me. The physical wound may heal in days, but the mental wound can last for years. A practice is learning to let the mind heal as the body does, to feel, to tend, to release. This does not mean we become indifferent. Compassion is essential. To ignore pain is to add another arrow of denial. True freedom is not cold detachment, but warm presence. It is the ability to say, this hurts, and I will care for myself here. I will not make it worse. Compassion softens the sharpness of life's arrows. It turns wounds into opportunities for kindness, both toward yourself and others. Imagine a man who has carried shame for decades. As a child, he was told he was not good enough. Each mistake became another arrow, each criticism another wound. He built his life around proving his worth, but no achievement was ever enough. Then one day, he begins to practice compassion. When the voice whispers, "You are a failure," he responds, "This is just an old wound speaking. I am human, and I deserve kindness." Slowly, the shame loses its power. He still feels the sting of the first arrow disappointments, criticisms, but he no longer multiplies the pain with his own cruelty. Compassion becomes his shield. When we speak of laying down the second arrow, we are not speaking of a single act, but of a lifelong practice. Life will continue to send arrows. You will face loss, rejection, illness, and uncertainty. But you can choose, again and again, to stop stabbing yourself with your own mind. You can choose to feel the first arrow fully, then set down the bow. Each time you do, you grow stronger, gentler, freer. And here is the profound beauty. When you learn to stop firing the second arrow at yourself, you also stop firing it at others. The harsh judgment you once directed inward no longer spills outward. The compassion you cultivate for your own wounds naturally extends to those around you. You see that everyone is carrying arrows. Everyone has been hurt. Everyone struggles not only with pain, but with the stories about pain. This recognition makes you gentler, more patient, more forgiving. The revolution within becomes a revolution in your relationships, your work, your community. So the teaching of the two arrows is not just about avoiding suffering. It is about transforming the way we live. It is about seeing that freedom is possible not when life becomes perfect, but when we stop adding unnecessary pain to what life already brings. As this chapter closes, let the question linger. What arrows have you been carrying? Which wounds come not from what happened, but from what you told yourself afterward? And are you ready, at last, to set down the bow? Because the key to stopping the second arrow lies in a deeper skill, the ability to pause in the heat of the moment, to notice the gap before the story begins. This pause is sacred. It is the gateway to freedom, and it is where we now turn. There is a space so small, it is often missed, yet so powerful, it can change the course of your entire life. It is the pause, the sacred pause between what happens to you and how you respond. Most people never notice it. Something occurs, an emotion rises, and the reaction follows instantly, like thunder chasing lightning. But if you can discover the pause, if you can learn to rest within it even for a breath, you unlock freedom that no circumstance can take away. Think about the last time someone said something hurtful to you. Perhaps it was a sharp remark from a colleague, a careless joke from a friend, or a criticism from a family member. The sting of the first arrow is immediate. Your body reacts: heat in the chest, tightness in the jaw, a rush of blood to the face. Normally, the second arrow follows without thought. You snap back with anger, or you retreat into silence while resentment builds. The pause is rarely noticed. But imagine if, in that instant, you could stop. Imagine if you could take one conscious breath before reacting. In that breath, everything changes. The hurt is still there, but you are no longer a prisoner of it. You see it, you feel it, and then you choose your response instead of being driven by reflex. That is the power of the sacred pause. The pause does not remove pain. It does not erase disappointment, frustration, or grief. What it does is create space wide enough for wisdom to enter. In that space, you are no longer defined by the first arrow, nor chained by the second. You are free to meet the moment with clarity, kindness, or silence. You are free to act from choice rather than compulsion. Modern life almost never encourages this pause. The culture rewards speed. Fast responses, quick comebacks, instant opinions. These are praised as signs of intelligence and strength. But true strength is not in speed. True strength is in stillness. The pause is not weakness. It is mastery. Anyone can lash out in anger. Anyone can collapse in despair. But to feel the surge of emotion and not be ruled by it, to hold it gently in awareness without rushing to act, that is rare. That is noble. That is the heart of freedom. Consider the story of a teacher who once asked her students to hold a glass of water at arm's length. At first, it seemed easy, but after a minute, their arms began to ache. After 5 minutes, the pain grew intense. After 10, some could not hold it anymore. The teacher explained, "The weight of the glass has not changed. What changed is the length of time you held it without pause." Life's burdens are the same. If you carry them constantly without setting them down, they become unbearable. But if you learn to pause, to rest, to breathe, the weight becomes manageable. The sacred pause is like setting down the glass. It does not eliminate the burden, but it allows you to carry it without breaking. How do we enter this pause? The doorway is always the body. When emotion rises, the mind races with stories, but the body reveals the truth of the moment. Anxiety appears as a racing heart, shallow breath, tight chest. Anger shows up as heat, clenched fists, rigid muscles. Sadness softens the shoulders, lowers the gaze, slows the breath. When you pause and turn your attention to the body, you interrupt the automatic story of the mind. You anchor yourself in sensation, not narrative. This is why mindfulness teaches us to come back to the breath. The breath is always here, always now. It cannot exist in the past or future. To feel one inhale and one exhale is to step into the pause dot at first. This feels awkward. The mind resists. Do something, it shouts. Fix this. Escape this. But the practice is to stay. To rest in the pause, even if only for 3 breaths. To feel the discomfort fully without rushing to cover it with reaction. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes. Soon the pause grows longer. 3 breaths become 5. 5 become 10. Eventually, the pause is wide enough to hold the whole storm without drowning. Think of an athlete training their body. At first, the muscles tremble under the weight, but with repetition, they grow stronger. The pause is the same. Each time you choose to stop, to breathe, to feel instead of react, you strengthen the muscle of awareness. Over time, this muscle becomes your greatest ally. It steadies you in chaos, calms you in conflict, and guides you in grief. The sacred pause is not only for moments of pain, it is also for moments of joy. Too often, we rush past happiness, already planning the next task or worrying it will not last. But joy, too, deserves the pause. When you laugh with a friend, when you hear a song that moves you, when you witness a sunset that paints the sky, pause. Feel it fully. Let the joy enter your body, your breath, your heart. In pausing, you allow joy to become nourishment rather than just another fleeting moment. The pause also transforms relationships. Imagine a couple arguing. Words fly, voices rise, and each is certain they are right. In the heat of reaction, love is forgotten. But if one partner pauses, just for a breath, the cycle can break. The pause gives space for listening, for softening, for remembering the bond beneath the conflict. In that breath, the argument becomes an opportunity for connection rather than destruction. The sacred pause is not about suppressing emotion. Suppression is another kind of arrow, one that buries pain instead of healing it. The pause is about meeting emotion honestly, giving it room to exist without letting it control you. It is about saying, yes, this is here, without rushing to add, and I must act on it right now. As you begin to practice the pause, you may be surprised by what arises. Sometimes, beneath anger lies grief. Beneath anxiety lies loneliness. Beneath frustration lies fatigue. When you pause, you see not only the surface emotion, but the layers beneath. This deeper seeing allows true healing. Without the pause, you treat only symptoms. With the pause, you touch the root. And so the sacred pause is more than a technique. It is a way of living. It is a commitment to step out of the automatic and into the aware. It is the choice to live each moment not as a slave to reaction, but as a participant in freedom. The question, then, is not whether life will send you arrows. It will. The question is whether you will continue to react blindly, or whether you will step into the pause and discover the freedom waiting there. To understand the depth of the sacred pause, it helps to see how quickly life can spin out of control when we miss it. Picture a young professional walking into a meeting. She is already nervous, carrying the weight of expectations. A colleague questions her idea in front of everyone. The first arrow lands embarrassment, a flush of heat, the sinking feeling in her chest. Before she notices, the second arrow follows. I am incompetent. Everyone thinks I am weak. I should never speak again. By the time she leaves the room, she is drowning in shame. But what if, in that exact moment, she had found the pause? What if she had taken one breath, felt her feet on the floor, and noticed the emotion rising? She might still feel the sting of embarrassment, but she would not be consumed. She could respond with clarity instead of collapsing into self-doubt. The pause would not erase the first arrow, but it would prevent the second from taking over. This is why the pause is sacred. It is not just a trick to calm yourself. It is the ground on which freedom is built. Every great transformation in human character begins here, in the small moment between stimulus and response. We often think of heroes as people who perform great acts in times of crisis. But the truth is, every person has the opportunity to be heroic in the ordinary. Each time you choose the pause instead of reaction, you are shaping a life of courage, compassion, and wisdom. The pause is also where truth reveals itself. Without it, we believe every thought that flashes through the mind. We react to illusions as if they were facts. But when you pause, you see thoughts for what they are, passing events, not commands. The mind may say, you are failing, but in the pause, you recognize it as just a thought. The body may feel restless, but in the pause, you realize it will pass. The sacred pause gives you perspective. It shows you that you are not your thoughts, not your emotions. You are the awareness that can hold them all. One of the most powerful practices to cultivate the pause is mindful breathing. The breath is a constant companion, always available, always present. When you feel overwhelmed, return to it. Feel the coolness of the inhale, the warmth of the exhale. Count each breath if it helps. Even 3 conscious breaths can open the doorway to freedom. In those breaths, you step out of the storm and into the eye of calm. You are not escaping life, you are meeting it more fully. Another practice is grounding in the senses. When emotions flood the mind, anchor yourself in the body. Feel the floor beneath your feet, the chair supporting your weight, the air on your skin. Listen to the sounds around you without labeling them. Look at the colors and shapes in the room without judgment. These simple acts pull you out of the spinning mind and into the present. The pause lives in the present. It cannot be found in past regrets or future fears. It can only be discovered here, now. Asterisk in time, the sacred pause becomes second nature. What once felt like a fragile experiment turns into a way of being. You notice yourself pausing before speaking in anger, pausing before reaching for distraction, pausing before giving in to despair. Each pause adds a brick to the foundation of freedom. And as the foundation strengthens, you find that life no longer tosses you around in the same way. Storms still come, but you are steady. The pause does not make you passive. On the contrary, it empowers action. Without it, your actions are reflexive, often harmful to yourself or others. With it, your actions are chosen, guided by wisdom rather than impulse. The pause is the birthplace of conscious living. There is also joy in the pause. It is not only for managing pain, but for expanding happiness. Think of the last time you ate a meal in a rush, barely tasting the food. Now imagine pausing before the first bite, smelling the aroma, feeling gratitude for the nourishment, savoring the flavors slowly. The pause transforms eating into a celebration. The same is true for laughter, for touch, for music. When you pause, you allow joy to saturate your being instead of slipping past unnoticed. The sacred pause also heals relationships. How many conflicts escalate because no one paused? A harsh word leads to another. A misunderstanding hardens into resentment, and bonds are broken. But if even one person pauses, the cycle can end. The pause creates space for listening, for empathy, for forgiveness. It is not about winning or losing. It is about remembering the humanity of the other person. In that pause, love has a chance to speak. Perhaps the most profound gift of the pause is that it reveals impermanence. When you sit with an emotion, instead of reacting, you see it rise, peak, and fall. Anxiety comes like a wave and then dissolves. Anger blazes like fire and then cools. Sadness flows like a river and then passes. In the pause, you see that nothing lasts forever. This insight alone can free you from fear. If every emotion is temporary, you do not need to cling to joy or fear sorrow. You can trust the flow of life, meeting each moment with openness. The sacred pause is simple, but it is not easy. It requires practice, patience, and courage. The mind will resist, urging you to react, to fix, to escape. But each time you choose to pause, you are rewriting the story of your life. You are proving to yourself that you are not a slave to circumstance. You are capable of freedom. Here and now. As this chapter closes, let the image of the pause settle in your heart. It is not a distant goal, not a complicated ritual. It is as close as your next breath. In that breath, you can stop the cycle of arrows. In that breath, you can discover peace. In that breath, you can change the story of your life. And as we turn to the next step of this journey, The pause prepares us for an even deeper truth, that the self we cling to so tightly, the I who feels anger, fear, and sadness, is not as solid as it seems. To understand this is to loosen suffering at its root. To see it clearly is to step further into freedom. For most of our lives, we speak as if the self were solid and unchanging. We say, I am angry, I am sad, I am anxious, as though a permanent I sits behind every experience, holding each emotion like possessions in a box. But when we look closely, we find that this I is not as firm as we think. It is more like a river than a rock, always moving, always changing, never the same from one moment to the next. To see this clearly is to loosen the grip of suffering, because the pain we feel so often comes from clinging to a self that is not truly there. The ancient teachings offer a way to explore this mystery through what is called the 5 aggregates. These are the 5 bundles, the 5 processes that together create the illusion of a permanent self. They are form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. None of these on their own can be called you. Together, they create the experience of a person, but like parts of a machine, they are constantly shifting, never fixed. When you understand them, you begin to see emotions not as heavy truths, but as patterns you can observe, understand, and release. The first aggregate is form. This is the body, the physical structure of bones and muscles, blood and breath. It is the sensation of your feet touching the floor, your lungs expanding with air, your heart pumping. So often, when emotions overwhelm us, we forget that they are anchored in the body. Anxiety is not only a thought, it is a racing heart, a tight chest, sweaty palms. Anger is not only a story, it is heat rising in the face, fists clenching. Sadness is not only an idea, it is heaviness in the shoulders, tears welling in the eyes. By seeing form clearly, we can stop believing emotions are abstract monsters and begin to notice them as physical processes that come and go. The second aggregate is sensation. Every experience carries with it a tone, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. This is the raw feeling that arises before the mind adds stories. When you sip warm tea on a cold morning, there is pleasant sensation. When you stub your toe, there is unpleasant sensation. When you glance at a blank wall, there is neutral sensation. Much of our suffering comes not from sensation itself, but from how we cling to the pleasant and resist the unpleasant. We chase pleasure as if it could last forever, and we push away pain as if we could avoid it forever. But sensations are fleeting. To see this is to loosen the endless chase and the endless fear. The third aggregate is perception. This is the mind's labeling function, the way it recognizes and names patterns. You hear a sound and your mind says, birdsong. You see a shape and your mind says, chair. You feel a tightness in your chest and your mind says, anxiety. Perception is useful. It helps us survive. But it also creates problems because we begin to mistake the label for the reality. The mind says failure or rejection, and suddenly that label feels like the whole truth of who we are. But perception is just a lens, not reality itself. The fourth aggregate is mental formations. These are the habits of thought, the beliefs, the intentions that shape our inner world. They are the old patterns we repeat: judgment, craving, resentment, kindness, generosity. When you feel anger rise, it is not only because of the present moment. It is also because of countless past experiences, countless times you have practiced reacting in that way. Mental formations are like grooves in the mind, worn deeper with repetition, but they are not permanent. Just as an old groove can be deepened, a new one can be created. Each moment of awareness is a chance to shape the mind anew. The fifth aggregate is consciousness. This is the field of awareness itself, the knowing that experiences all the other aggregates. Consciousness does not control what arises. It simply receives. Like a mirror, it reflects everything placed before it, pleasant or unpleasant, bright or dark, without preference. To rest in consciousness is to remember that you are not only the contents of your mind, but the space in which they appear. Together, these 5 aggregates create the experience we call self. But notice how each one is shifting, unstable, dependent on countless conditions. The body ages. Sensations change moment by moment. Perceptions are shaped by memory and culture. Mental formations rise and fall. Consciousness itself flickers with sleep, waking, and dreaming. There is no permanent core holding it all together, only the flowing dance of these processes. Why does this matter? Because when we believe in a solid self, we cling tightly to emotions, as if they define us. I am angry, we say, and so anger becomes our identity. But when we see the aggregates, we can say instead, anger is here. Anger is not who we are. It is a passing combination of body sensation, unpleasant feeling, a perception of threat, a mental formation of defense, all held in awareness. When seen this way, anger loses its chains. It becomes something we can hold gently, study, and release. Imagine a young man who believes he is an anxious person. Every situation feels like proof of that identity: public speaking, social gatherings, even quiet evenings alone. He clings to the idea that anxiety is who he is. But when he learns the aggregates, he begins to see anxiety differently. He notices the racing heart, form. He feels the unpleasant tone of tightness, sensation. He recognizes the label anxiety, perception. He sees the habit of fearing judgment, mental formation. He holds it all in awareness, consciousness. Suddenly, the identity crumbles. He is not an anxious person. He is a person experiencing a temporary pattern called anxiety. This shift is profound. What felt permanent now feels movable. What felt like a prison now feels like weather. The teaching of the aggregates is not about denying the self, but about loosening our grip on it. We still live, we still feel, we still act. But we do so with the understanding that the self is not a fixed object, but a flowing process. This insight gives us freedom. When you know the storm is not the sky, you stop confusing every cloud with the end of the world. And yet, to truly live this understanding, we must go further. If the self is a bundle of processes, then what does that say about our emotions, our attachments, our suffering? Could it be that what feels so heavy and permanent is, in fact, empty of solidity? To answer this, we turn to one of the most liberating truths ever spoken, the truth of emptiness. When we first hear that the self is not a fixed entity, but a collection of shifting processes, the idea may feel unsettling. For so long we have been told to be yourself, to find an identity and cling to it as if it were solid ground. But if you look deeply, you see that this ground is not stable at all. The body changes every moment, cells die and renew, breath comes and goes, sensations rise and fade. Thoughts appear, then vanish. Beliefs shift with time and experience. Even memory, which we often trust as proof of who we are, bends and blurs with retelling. The so-called self is more like a story told by these 5 aggregates than a permanent author behind them. This realization is not meant to erase your humanity. It is meant to free you, because when you see that emotions are built from these parts, you stop treating them as immovable truths. You stop believing, this is who I am, and instead see, this is what is happening right now. That subtle shift changes everything. Let us take an example. Imagine a woman who has carried the belief, I am not worthy of love. Each failed relationship, each rejection seemed to confirm it. But when she looks through the lens of the aggregates, she sees it differently. The ache in her chest is form. The loneliness is sensation, colored and pleasant. The thought, I am unworthy, is perception naming the feeling. The long habit of self-criticism is a mental formation. All of this is held in consciousness, which itself is just awareness. Suddenly, I am not worthy loses its weight. It is not a permanent truth. It is a temporary pattern. With practice, she learns to meet the pattern with kindness instead of clinging to it as her identity. That is the liberating power of deconstructing the self. This practice also helps us with anger. Anger feels so personal, so defining, that we often say, "I am angry," as if anger were our name. But look more closely. Anger is heat in the body, an unpleasant sensation, the perception of threat, the mental formation of defense, all noticed by consciousness. Anger is not who you are. It is a process unfolding. When you see anger this way, you can hold it without being consumed by it. You may still feel the fire, but you are not the fire itself. The same is true with fear. Fear may feel like an identity. I am a fearful person. But break it apart. Rapid heartbeat, tight chest, unpleasant sensation, the perception of danger, the mental habit of imagining worst-case scenarios, all within awareness. Fear is not you. It is a passing storm. Knowing this gives you courage, because you realize you are larger than fear, larger than anger, larger than sadness. You are the sky in which they all appear. This understanding also softens how we view others. When someone lashes out in anger, we often label them. He is an angry person, but if we see through the aggregates, we recognize that he is not defined by anger. He is experiencing the temporary processes of anger. Tomorrow, those processes may shift into joy or tenderness. This perspective cultivates compassion. We stop freezing people into identities and start seeing them as dynamic beings, always changing, always more than their worst moment. One of the most powerful fruits of this teaching is humility. When we realize that the self is not a fixed entity, pride softens. We stop clinging to rigid identities like successful, beautiful, important, or even failure, ugly, unworthy. See that these labels are built from aggregates that shift like sand. And when the sand shifts, the label dissolves. What remains is not nothingness, but openness. A space wide enough for growth, forgiveness, and change. This does not mean we live without direction. It means we live with flexibility. If the self is a river, then we can flow with it, not fight against it. We can allow new patterns to form, new habits to take root. We can choose generosity instead of greed, kindness instead of judgment, patience instead of resentment. By shaping our mental formations, we shape the river's path. The aggregates are not destiny. They are opportunity. In daily life, this perspective can be a refuge. When you feel overwhelmed, remind yourself, this is just form, sensation, perception, mental formation, and consciousness. Nothing more. When you feel lost, remind yourself, there is no permanent I to be lost. There is only this moment unfolding. This practice takes what feels heavy and makes it light. It turns what feels permanent into something fluid, movable, changeable. Of course, the mind resists this teaching. It wants certainty. It wants a solid I to defend and preserve. But look honestly. Has clinging to a fixed self ever brought peace? Or has it brought more fear, more comparison, more suffering? The deeper truth is that freedom comes not from holding tightly, but from letting go. And so, as we deconstruct the self, we begin to see the emptiness at the heart of it all. Not emptiness as void or despair, but emptiness as openness, possibility, freedom. The aggregates show us that the self is built from conditions. Emotions, too, are built from conditions. And if something is built, it can be unbuilt. If it is constructed, it can be deconstructed. This insight does not diminish life. It liberates it. As this chapter closes, hold this image. The self is not a stone wall, but a woven basket. Each strand form, sensation, perception, mental formation, consciousness interlaces to create the illusion of solidity. But if you pull apart the strands, you see there was never a solid wall at all. Only parts, only processes, only flow. And within that flow lies freedom. From here, the path naturally leads to the next insight, emptiness. If the self and emotions are not solid, then what are they? What does it mean to live with the awareness that everything is empty of permanence? To step into this truth is to find a liberation deeper than we can imagine. When people first hear the word emptiness, they often recoil. It sounds cold, frightening, even meaningless. To many, emptiness suggests a void where nothing matters, a kind of despair in which life has no value. But in the language of wisdom, emptiness does not mean nihilism. It does not mean nothing exists. It means that nothing exists independently, permanently, or solidly. Everything is made of conditions. Everything is connected. Everything changes. And to realize this is not to fall into despair, but to be set free. Think of a clay pot. On the surface, it looks solid. You can touch it, use it, store water in it. But if you examine it carefully, you see that the pot is made of clay, which came from the earth. The earth was shaped by rain, by rivers, by time. The pot was formed by a potter, whose hands were shaped by generations of ancestors. The pot does not exist by itself. It exists because of countless causes and conditions. And if one condition had been different, the clay missing, the potter absent, the pot would not exist. This is emptiness, the recognition that nothing has an independent, unchanging essence. Our emotions are the same. Fear, sadness, anger, joy, they feel solid, as if they define us. But look closer. Fear arises because of a memory, a bodily sensation, a thought about the future. Sadness arises because of loss, longing, or unmet expectations. Anger arises because of perceived injustice, frustration, or old wounds. Every emotion is born from causes and conditions. It does not exist by itself. It does not last forever. It is empty of permanence, empty of fixed identity. Imagine being caught in a storm. The thunder is loud, the rain heavy, the wind fierce. In the middle of it, you feel as if the storm will never end. But storms always end. They arise because of conditions, the meeting of winds, the clash of temperatures, the gathering of clouds. When conditions shift, the storm dissolves. The same is true for emotions. They feel eternal in the moment, but they are only temporary weather passing through the sky of your awareness. To remember their emptiness is to remember their impermanence. This is liberating because so much of our suffering comes from believing emotions are permanent truths. We say, I will always feel this way. This sadness will never end. This fear is who I am. But when you see emptiness, you realize this is not true. Sadness is not forever. It is the result of conditions that will change. Fear is not your identity. It is a process that will pass. Joy, too, will not last, and that is why it must be savored. To know emptiness is to stop clinging. You stop grasping at what you want to keep and stop fighting what you want to avoid. You let life flow, and in that flow, you find peace. Consider a man who loses his job. At first, despair grips him. He tells himself, I am worthless. My life is ruined. But if he looks closely, he sees that his despair is not a fixed truth. It arises because of the loss of income, the fear of judgment, the pressure of responsibility, the habits of self-doubt. Each of these is a condition. Each condition can shift. Over time, new opportunities appear, skills develop, confidence grows. The despair that once felt permanent fades. The man sees that his suffering was never a solid wall, it was a cloud passing through. This is the gift of emptiness. It shows us that nothing is as heavy as it seems. When you hold anger as mine, it crushes you. When you see anger as empty, arising from conditions, you can observe it without drowning. You can say, "This is not who I am. This is a temporary process." Suddenly, you have space. Suddenly, you can breathe. Emptiness also deepens compassion. When you realize that every person's actions are shaped by countless conditions, judgment softens. The rude stranger in traffic is not simply a bad person. Perhaps he is exhausted, carrying burdens you cannot see. The coworker who snaps at you is not defined by her anger. Perhaps she is grieving, anxious, or overwhelmed. When you see the emptiness of fixed identities, you stop reducing people to their worst moments. You see them as human beings caught in conditions, just like you. This opens the door to forgiveness and patience. Asterisk in relationships. The truth of emptiness is a balm. Couples often fight because they freeze each other into identities. You are always this way. You never change. But emptiness teaches that no one is fixed. People grow, shift, learn, unlearn. Every moment is a chance to begin again. When partners remember this, love becomes lighter. They no longer demand perfection or permanence. They embrace the flow of change, and in doing so, they find resilience. Some may fear that emptiness makes life meaningless, but the opposite is true. If nothing were empty, nothing could change. If emotions were solid, you would be trapped in them forever. If identities were permanent, forgiveness and growth would be impossible. Emptiness is the very reason transformation is possible. It is why healing can happen, why joy can return, why love can be renewed. Emptiness is not the absence of meaning. It is the presence of possibility. Imagine holding a clenched fist. As long as you squeeze, your hand cannot receive anything new. When you open your hand, when you allow emptiness, you can receive. Life is like that. When you cling to fixed identities, fixed emotions, fixed expectations, your heart is closed. But when you recognize emptiness, your heart opens. You can receive life as it comes, with all its sorrow and beauty, without being crushed by it. So the truth of emptiness is not something to fear. It is something to embrace. It shows us that we are not trapped in our stories. It shows us that suffering is not permanent. It shows us that freedom is possible here and now. And yet, to truly live this truth, we must see how emptiness plays out in the patterns of our lives. Why do the same emotions arise again and again? Why do we repeat the same cycles, even when we want to change? The answer lies in the chain of causes and conditions, the cycle of becoming. And to understand, it is to find the key to breaking free. The more deeply you explore emptiness, the more you realize it is not an abstract idea, but a living experience. It is felt in the body, in the heart, in the quiet awareness that watches everything come and go. To see emptiness is to see that nothing can be held forever, not joy, not pain, not even the self you think you are. And instead of despair, this realization brings relief. You no longer carry the impossible task of trying to freeze life. You let it move, and in that movement, you find peace. One of the clearest ways to touch emptiness is to reflect on simple objects around you. Look at a wooden chair. At first glance, it seems solid and independent. But look closer. The chair comes from a tree. The tree came from a seed nourished by soil, sunlight, and rain. The wood was cut by human hands, shaped by tools, carried by trucks, sold in a store. The chair contains sunshine, water, earth, labor, and countless conditions. Without them, the chair would not exist. The chair is empty of a separate, permanent self. And yet, it is full of everything. To see this is to understand emptiness as interconnection, not void. Now look at yourself in the same way. You too are empty of an independent self. Your body is the gift of your parents, shaped by food from the earth, air from the sky, care from others. Your mind is shaped by teachers, by culture, by countless interactions. Even your thoughts arise because of conditions. What you ate, how you slept, the words you just heard, the memories you carry. You are not a sealed container. You are a living process, open to the flow of life. This is not a loss of self. It is the discovery that the self is vast, interconnected, and free. Emptiness also reveals the futility of clinging. Imagine holding tightly to a flower. At first, it is beautiful, alive. But no matter how tightly you cling, the petals will wither. If you resist this truth, you suffer twice, once from the natural fading, and once from your refusal to accept it. But if you embrace emptiness, you enjoy the flower fully while it lasts, and when it fades, you let it go. This is how emptiness teaches us to love more deeply, not less. We stop trying to own beauty, and instead learn to honor it in its passing. The same applies to relationships. When you forget emptiness, you cling to people as if they could stay unchanged forever. You demand they remain who they were yesterday. You grasp for permanence in something that cannot be permanent. The result is disappointment and conflict. But when you remember emptiness, you love without clinging. You appreciate each moment because you know it cannot be repeated. You allow others to grow, to change, to move, even to leave. This is not coldness. It is the warmest love of all, because it is free. Emptiness also helps with fear. Fear often grows from imagining the future is fixed. This will always be this way. I will never escape. Things cannot change. But emptiness reminds us that change is constant. No state lasts forever. Even the heaviest sorrow shifts. Even the darkest night ends. To hold emptiness is to hold hope, because it means every moment is open to transformation. Some people resist this truth because they want stability. They fear that without a permanent self or permanent emotions, life will feel meaningless. But stability does not come from clinging. It comes from trust in the flow. Think of the ocean. Its waves are always moving, rising and falling, yet the ocean itself remains vast and steady. In the same way, your awareness can remain steady even as emotions rise and fall. You do not need a fixed identity to feel whole. You only need to recognize the emptiness of every passing wave and the vastness of the sea beneath. Insight also transforms suffering. When pain arises, you may think, "This is unbearable. This is me." But if you see its emptiness, you recognize it as a temporary construction. Pain is sensation, perception, memory, habit, all conditions arising together. It is not an eternal truth. It is not the whole of who you are. This does not make pain vanish, but it makes it lighter. You can carry it without being crushed. Imagine someone who feels constant anxiety. Each day, they wake with a knot in their stomach, a flood of worried thoughts. They tell themselves, "This is my identity. I am an anxious person." But when they learn emptiness, they see the anxiety differently. It arises from poor sleep, from pressures at work, from old fears planted in childhood, from the body's stress response. These are conditions, not destiny. The anxiety is empty of permanence. And because it is empty, it can shift. With practice, with care, with new conditions, the anxiety softens. Hope returns. This is the liberating truth. Emptiness does not erase suffering, but it dissolves the illusion that suffering is eternal. It opens the door to transformation. It reminds us that if something is constructed, it can be deconstructed. If it has arisen from conditions, it can fade when conditions change. And so, emptiness is not a philosophy to be admired from afar. It is a practice to be lived. Each time you remind yourself, "This is temporary," This is not solid. You lighten the burden. Each time you see yourself and others as processes, not fixed identities, you open the door to compassion. Each time you let go of clinging, you discover freedom. As this chapter draws to a close, carry this truth with you. Life is empty not of meaning, but of permanence. It is empty not of beauty, but of solidity. Emptiness is the space in which joy and sorrow, love and loss, rise and fall like waves. And because they rise and fall, you are free. You are not chained to one state forever. You are part of a living, moving, breathing world where everything changes. And that change is your greatest hope. From here, the journey naturally continues to the next great insight. If everything is empty, why do we still feel trapped in repeating cycles of pain? Why do the same patterns arise again and again, as if we were stuck on a wheel that never stops turning? The answer lies in the teaching of dependent origination, the cycle of becoming. And to understand, it is to find the key to interrupting the wheel of suffering. If emptiness shows us that nothing stands alone, then the cycle of becoming reveals how everything arises together. It explains why we keep falling into the same patterns of suffering, even when we wish to live differently. The cycle is not fate, not punishment, but a mirror held up to the mind. When we see it clearly, we begin to understand how freedom is possible. The teaching is called dependent origination. It shows that suffering is not random, nor is it inevitable. It arises from causes and conditions. One moment feeds into the next, one habit shapes another, one belief sparks countless actions. Like links in a chain, each step leads to the next until we find ourselves bound. But if we trace the links carefully, we can see where to step aside, where to break the chain, where to interrupt the cycle. Imagine planting a seed. The seed does not grow alone. It needs soil, water, sunlight, air. Each condition supports the sprout, and soon the plant flourishes. In the same way, emotions and suffering are like plants. They grow because of the conditions we feed them, habits of thought, ways of reacting, the stories we repeat. Anger grows because it is watered by judgment and fear. Anxiety grows because it is fed by uncertainty and self-doubt. But just as you can stop watering a plant, you can stop feeding the conditions that sustain suffering. The cycle of becoming is often described as 12 links, a wheel that turns endlessly. But we can understand it in simpler terms. At its heart, it shows how ignorance gives rise to craving, how craving gives rise to clinging, and how clinging leads to suffering. This wheel keeps turning until awareness interrupts it. Let us begin with ignorance. This is not stupidity. It is the simple failure to see things as they are. It is forgetting emptiness, forgetting impermanence, forgetting that everything is connected. When we live in ignorance, we take emotions as solid truths, identities as permanent realities, pleasures as things we can cling to forever. This blindness sets the wheel in motion. From ignorance comes craving. Because we do not see the truth of impermanence, we chase after what feels good, believing it will last. We crave success, love, security, comfort. Craving in itself is not evil. It is simply the natural movement of the mind toward pleasure. But when craving is blind, it becomes endless. We keep reaching, keep grasping, never satisfied, because the objects of craving are always slipping through our fingers. From craving comes clinging. This is the tightening of the fist around what we desire. We cling to people, to possessions, to identities. We cling not only to pleasure, but even to pain, replaying old wounds because they feel familiar. Clinging hardens the flow of life into something heavy. It says, this must stay. This must define me. And from clinging arises suffering. This is how the wheel turns. Ignorance blinds us, craving pulls us, clinging binds us, and suffering is the result. Then, from suffering, new ignorance is born. and the cycle begins again. Like a wheel spinning down a hill, it carries us along unless we step off. But here is the liberating truth. Every link in the chain is an opportunity. The wheel is not unbreakable. At any point, awareness can intervene. If you see craving as craving, you loosen its grip. If you see clinging as clinging, you soften your fist. If you see suffering as conditioned, you remember it is not permanent. Each moment of awareness is like placing a stick in the spokes of the wheel. It slows, it stutters, it may even stop. Think of a man who has always believed he must prove his worth. Ignorance tells him he is incomplete. Craving drives him to seek validation through achievements, money, approval. Clinging locks him into an identity. I am successful, therefore I matter. But life, being impermanent, brings failure, rejection, loss. The suffering is intense. If he remains blind, the cycle continues. New craving, new clinging, new suffering. But if one day he pauses, if he sees the pattern, he can step off the wheel. He can realize, my worth is not found in success. My suffering is not destiny. I can stop clinging. That awareness shatters the cycle. The cycle of becoming is not only personal, it is cultural. Entire societies are built on ignorance, craving, and clinging. Advertisements whisper, you are incomplete. Buy this and you will be whole. The craving is stirred, the clinging reinforced, the suffering multiplied. Nations cling to wealth, to power, to identity, and wars erupt. Families cling to pride, to grudges, and relationships fracture. To see the cycle is not only to free yourself, but to begin healing the world. Breaking the cycle does not mean eliminating desire altogether. Desire for food keeps us alive. Desire for safety protects us. Even the desire to awaken, to live with compassion, is part of the path. What matters is how we hold desire. Blind craving binds us. Wise aspiration frees us. The shift happens in awareness. The same fire that burns can also warm. The same craving that enslaves can, when transformed, become energy for growth. When you watch the cycle closely, you begin to see it in the smallest moments. A thought arises. I need to check my phone. Ignorance says, this will make me happy. Craving appears, the urge to reach. Clinging follows, the compulsion to scroll endlessly. Suffering arrives, distraction, emptiness, wasted time. But if you catch it, if you notice the urge and pause, you break the cycle. You put the phone down, breathe, and return to presence. This small act is no different from the great liberation. It is the wheel stopping, even for a moment. And so the cycle of becoming is not a sentence, but a map. It shows us where we lose ourselves and where we can find freedom again. It shows us that suffering is not random, but conditioned. And if it is conditioned, it can be unconditioned. The next question, then, is this. If suffering arises from ignorance, craving, and clinging, how do we meet those forces with wisdom, compassion, and release? How do we live in a world full of temptations and losses without being chained to them? The answer begins with learning to let go not as rejection, but as liberation. To break free from the cycle of becoming, we must begin by seeing it clearly in our own lives. This is not a theoretical teaching to be memorized. It is a mirror we must hold up to the moments that define our days. When you wake up in the morning and immediately reach for your phone, notice the chain. Ignorance tells you that distraction will bring peace. Craving urges you to seek stimulation. Clinging keeps you scrolling. And suffering appears as restlessness and fatigue. A cycle does not wait for grand tragedies. It operates in the smallest habits, the quietest corners of your life. Freedom begins when you notice. The simple act of pausing to say, this is craving, loosens its hold. Suddenly, you are no longer inside the cycle, but watching it from the outside. This awareness alone is a revolution. The wheel may still turn, but you no longer spin with it blindly. You begin to have a choice. Consider how this plays out with anger. Someone criticizes you. The first arrow lands, the sting of hurt. Ignorance says, I must defend myself, or I am weak. Craving arises, the urge to strike back. Clinging follows, the story that you are right, they are wrong. Then suffering arrives, conflict, regret, distance. But if you recognize the cycle in the moment, you can step aside. You can see the hurt without turning it into war. You can pause before the words fly. The criticism may still sting, but the wheel stops spinning. What could have become a broken relationship becomes an opportunity for patience. The same is true for fear. A student waits for exam results. Ignorance whispers, this grade will define my worth. Craving drives her to imagine perfect success. Clinging locks her into the story that failure will ruin her life. Then suffering floods in anxiety, sleepless nights, despair. But if she sees the cycle, she can interrupt it. She can say, this is a grade, not my identity. My worth is not bound to this outcome. With that shift, fear softens. The wheel slows. The cycle also explains why suffering often repeats. We wonder, why do I keep making the same mistakes? Why do I fall into the same relationships, the same habits, the same regrets? The answer is that the wheel has been spinning for so long, its grooves are deep. The mind repeats what it knows. Ignorance leads to craving, craving to clinging, clinging to suffering, again and again. But the grooves are not destiny. Each moment of awareness is like stepping off the well-worn path and carving a new one dot. It helps to imagine the cycle as a wheel of fire. Every time it turns, it burns you. The flames are the suffering created by your own mind. Most people keep turning the wheel because they do not see another way. But when you realize you can step off, when you see that the fire is not eternal, you are free. The wheel may still exist, but it no longer controls you. To step off the wheel. You do not need to destroy craving or clinging forever. You only need to see them in the moment. Awareness itself is enough to interrupt the cycle. Each time you notice the craving before it becomes clinging, the wheel slows. Each time you breathe instead of reacting, the fire dims. Liberation is not one grand act, but 1,000 small pauses. This practice does not mean avoiding life. It does not mean suppressing desire or refusing to engage with the world. It means engaging with clarity. It means enjoying pleasure without clinging, facing pain without collapsing, holding success and failure lightly. It means living fully while knowing that nothing is permanent. When you live this way, the wheel still turns around you, but you no longer ride it blindly. You walk freely beside it. The cycle of becoming also reveals the power of choice in every moment. You may not choose the first arrow, what happens to you, but you can choose how the cycle unfolds after that. You can feed ignorance, or you can feed awareness. You can chase craving, or you can let it pass. You can cling tightly, or you can open your hand. These choices, repeated again and again, shape your life more than any single event. Imagine a woman who has lived for years in this cycle of resentment. A friend betrayed her long ago, and she has carried the wound ever since. Ignorance tells her that replaying the betrayal keeps her safe. Craving urges her to seek justice. Clinging ties her identity to the story of being wronged. And so suffering follows her into every new friendship, every new moment. But one day, she begins to see the cycle. She realizes the betrayal is long past, but the suffering continues because she keeps spinning the wheel. She begins to practice letting go. Slowly, the resentment softens. For the first time in years, she feels light. The wheel has stopped, not because the past changed, but because she stopped turning it. This is the essence of unraveling the cycle. You learn that suffering is not your destiny. It is a process. And what is made by process can be unmade by awareness. As this chapter closes, remember, the wheel turns as long as you feed it. But you have the power to step off. You can break the chain at any link. Awareness is the key. Compassion is the ground. And letting go is the doorway. And from here, we arrive at the next truth. That letting go is not a loss, but a gain. To release the tight grip of clinging is to discover a peace deeper than possession, a joy greater than control. Letting go is not giving up, it is opening up. And that is where we now turn. Letting go is one of the most misunderstood teachings on the path to freedom. Many hear the words and imagine renunciation as a life of deprivation, of giving up everything that brings joy. They fear that letting go means abandoning the people they love, turning away from beauty, or rejecting the pleasures of life. But in truth, letting go is not rejection. It is not about throwing life away. It is about loosening the grip that strangles joy. It is about releasing the tight fist so the hand can open, so that life can be received more fully. Think of a child holding a balloon. At first, the balloon brings delight. But if the child clutches it too tightly, the balloon may burst. If the child refuses to let go, the hand cramps and the joy disappears. But if the child holds it lightly, or even releases it into the sky, the moment becomes wonder again. This is the art of letting go, not destruction, but freedom. In our daily lives, clinging is everywhere. We cling to possessions, convinced they define our worth. We cling to identities, certain they prove our value. We cling to relationships, fearing that love will vanish if we loosen our grasp. We even cling to pain, replaying old wounds because they feel familiar. Each act of clinging tightens the chains of suffering. The art of letting go is the art of freedom. It teaches us that joy does not come from grasping, but from openness. Consider possessions. In a culture of constant consumption, we are taught that happiness lies in accumulation. The new car, the bigger house, the latest device all promise satisfaction. But how long does the satisfaction last? The joy fades and craving rises again. This is the cycle of becoming dressed in consumer clothing. Letting go does not mean refusing all possessions. It means refusing to be possessed by them. You can enjoy what you have without chaining your happiness to it. You can use possessions as tools rather than as measures of your worth. The same is true with identity. We cling to labels: successful, intelligent, attractive, important. When life affirms these labels, we feel proud. When life threatens them, we collapse. But who are we without the labels? Letting go means loosening the identity without losing the self. It means remembering that you are not defined by your job, your achievements, or your failures. You are larger than any label. To let go of identity is to step out of the prison of comparison and into the spaciousness of being. Relationships, too, are often places of clinging. We say, "You are mine," and mistake possession for love. But love rooted in clinging suffocates both giver and receiver. It demands permanence in a world where everything changes. Letting go in relationships does not mean abandoning love. It means freeing it. It means loving without chains, allowing the other person to grow, to change, even to leave. True love is not grasping but giving. It says, "I want your happiness, even if it does not always include me." This love is lighter, deeper, and more enduring because it flows instead of binds. Even pain can be something we cling to. A person may carry resentment for decades, replaying the same betrayal until it defines them. Another may hold on to guilt, punishing themselves long after the mistake is past. These pains become familiar identities, and in a strange way, they feel safe. Letting go here is the most difficult because it means stepping into the unknown. But it is also the most liberating. To release resentment is to unburden the heart. To forgive yourself is to open the door to joy. The art of letting go is not learned in a single moment. It is practiced breath by breath. It begins with awareness, noticing when the fist tightens. You feel the clinging in the body, a tension in the chest, a knot in the stomach, a restless energy in the mind. You recognize it gently, without judgment. Then you practice softening, opening, releasing. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you fail. But every attempt is part of the path. Imagine a woman who has always struggled with control. She plans every detail of her life, clinging to certainty. When things go as planned, she feels safe. When they do not, she feels anxious and angry. One day, she begins to practice letting go. She starts small, allowing a friend to choose the restaurant, leaving a day unplanned. At first, it feels uncomfortable, even frightening. But slowly, she notices the freedom in it. She laughs more, relaxes more, discovers joy in the unexpected. The art of letting go transforms her life not by removing responsibility, but by releasing the illusion of control. Letting go does not mean passivity. It does not mean giving up effort or abandoning dreams. It means holding everything lightly. You still work, still strive, still love, but without chaining your happiness to the outcome. You do your best, then you release. You trust the flow of life. In that trust, you find peace. The practice of letting go can be as simple as breathing. With each exhale, you release what no longer serves you. Tension, fear, the grip of yesterday. With each inhale, you receive what is new. Fresh air, fresh life, fresh possibility. Every breath is a teacher of letting go. And so the art of letting go is not about losing, but about gaining. It gives you freedom, spaciousness, clarity. It allows you to love more deeply, live more fully, and suffer less. It turns life from a prison of clinging into a dance of openness. As we move forward, we will see that letting go is not only about possessions or identities, but also about how we live each day. When we live with presence, we let go of the weight of past regrets and the pull of future fears. We enter the power of now. The beauty of letting go is that it transforms ordinary life. You do not have to retreat to a monastery or give up everything you own. Letting go can happen in the middle of traffic, in a crowded office, in the quiet of your own home. It is not about where you are, but about how you meet each moment. Take, for example, the weight of regret. Many people carry regrets like stones in their pockets. They replay past mistakes, telling themselves, "I should have known better. I should have acted differently." Each memory becomes another stone until the burden is unbearable. Letting go does not mean erasing the past. It means learning from it, bowing to it, and then setting it down. You acknowledge the mistake, you take responsibility, and then you release the stone. The lesson remains, but the burden is gone. This is how letting go frees you from the prison of yesterday. The same is true with fear of the future. The mind loves to build stories of what might happen: failure, loss, rejection. We grip these imagined futures as if they were real, tightening our chest with anxiety. Letting go here means recognizing that the future has not yet arrived. It means loosening your grip on what is only imagination. You prepare wisely, yes, but you do not live inside the story. You return to the present, which is always lighter than the imagined weight of tomorrow. Letting go also applies to control in relationships. Parents, for example, often cling to an image of who their children should become. They push, correct, and criticize, trying to shape their children into a vision. But the more tightly they cling, the more distance grows. Letting go does not mean neglecting guidance. It means loosening control enough to let love breathe. It means trusting that each person must walk their own path. This trust strengthens relationships rather than weakening them. Work, too, becomes lighter with letting go. Imagine a man who ties his entire identity to his career. Each promotion feeds his worth. Each failure shatters it. He clings so tightly that work becomes a battlefield rather than a calling. But when he practices letting go, he remembers, my work is what I do, not who I am. He still works hard, but without the desperation of clinging. Success becomes a gift, not a necessity. Failure becomes a lesson, not a death sentence. The art of letting go restores balance. Letting go also opens the door to forgiveness. Resentment is one of the heaviest burdens the heart can carry. It clings to old wounds, insisting, I cannot be free until justice is served, but justice may never come. The past cannot be rewritten. The only way forward is to release the grip of resentment. Forgiveness does not excuse the harm. It does not erase the memory. It simply says, I will not carry this weight any longer. In letting go of resentment, you give yourself the gift of freedom. Self-forgiveness is perhaps the hardest form of letting go. We hold ourselves to impossible standards, punishing ourselves long after the world has moved on. But self-forgiveness is not indulgence. It is compassion. It is recognizing that you, too, are human, imperfect, learning, growing. Letting go of self-judgment does not mean ignoring mistakes. It means meeting them with kindness, learning what you can, and releasing the rest. Without this, no true peace is possible. The art of letting go also transforms how we experience joy. Often, when something beautiful arises, a moment of laughter, a sunset, a tender touch, we cling to it desperately. We say, I don't want this to end, but clinging suffocates joy. The moment is already fleeting. To clutch at it only makes its passing more painful. Letting go means savoring the moment fully, knowing it cannot be held. It means saying, yes, this is here now, and releasing it as it fades. In this way, letting go deepens joy instead of diminishing it. Asterisk. A useful practice is to bring letting go into your daily routines. When you wake up, notice the first thought that arises. Is it heavy with worry or regret? If so, practice setting it down with your first breath. Throughout the day, notice when your shoulders tense, when your jaw clenches, when your mind races. Each of these is a sign of clinging. Each is an invitation to release. At night, before sleep, review your day. Ask yourself, what am I still carrying that I can set down? Then breathe it out. Slowly, letting go becomes not just a practice, but a way of life. Letting go does not mean becoming careless. In fact, it allows you to care more deeply. When you are not tangled in clinging, your heart is free to be present. You love without fear, work without desperation, live without chains. Letting go gives you the freedom to show up fully, without being imprisoned by outcomes. And so, the art of letting go is not about losing control of your life. It is about releasing the illusion that you ever had complete control in the first place. Life flows. People change. Circumstances shift. When you fight the flow, you suffer. When you release into it, you discover peace. As this chapter draws to a close, hold this truth. Letting go is not a weakness, but a strength. It takes courage to release what you cling to. It takes faith to open your hand and trust life. But in that courage, in that faith, you find freedom. And from here, we move naturally into the heart of presence. Letting go prepares us to step fully into the moment, to release the weight of past and future so we can live in the now. This is the power of presence, the doorway to peace, and the next step on our journey. Presence is the heartbeat of freedom. Without it, even the deepest wisdom remains distant, like a book unread on a shelf. With it, Every moment becomes alive, sacred, and full of possibility. Presence is not about exotic rituals or lofty philosophy. It is the simple, radical act of being here, fully here, with body, mind, and heart united in this very breath. Most of us live in exile from the present. Our bodies may sit at a dinner table, but our minds race through emails, memories, and worries. We drive to work, but barely notice the road. We speak to loved ones while scrolling on a screen. Life slips through our fingers not because it is hidden, but because we are not present for it. The tragedy is not that life is too short, but that we miss so much of it while it is happening. Presence is the antidote. It calls us back from the fog of past and future into the clarity of now. It says, you do not need to wait for peace. You do not need to wait for joy. Both are here in this very moment, if only you arrive to meet them. The power of presence is easiest to see in the body. Right now, feel your breath. Notice the coolness as it enters, the warmth as it leaves. Feel your feet pressing against the ground, the weight of your body on the chair. These sensations anchor you to reality. They remind you that life is not in the stories swirling in your mind, but in the direct experience of this breath, this touch, this sound. The body is always here. It is the mind that wanders. To return to presence is simply to bring the mind back to the body. When you live in presence, emotions change too. Anxiety loses its grip because anxiety feeds on the future. Regret loses its chains because regret feeds on the past. In presence, there is no future to fear, no past to mourn. There is only the breath, the heartbeat, the ground beneath you. Even pain is transformed in presence. A headache is simply sensation, a throb, a pulse when you stay with it directly. It becomes suffering only when the mind adds stories. This will never end. Something must be wrong with me. Presence strips away the stories and leaves only what is real. Presence also deepens joy. Have you ever eaten a meal in a rush, barely tasting it? The food was nourishing, but you missed its gift because you were absent. Now imagine eating with presence. You pause before the first bite, notice the aroma, savor the flavors slowly. A sane meal becomes a feast, a meditation, a gratitude. Presence does not create joy out of nothing. It reveals the joy already here. That the same is true in relationships. A child does not crave a perfect parent. A child craves presence. To kneel down, look into their eyes, and listen fully is a gift greater than any toy. A partner does not crave constant excitement. A partner craves presence, the sense that you are truly there, not distracted, not half lost in another world. Presence is love made visible. It tells the other, you matter enough for me to be here now. Presence also transforms ordinary work. Washing dishes can feel like a chore when the mind resists. I want this to be done. But in presence, even washing dishes becomes alive, the warm water on your hands, the sound of bubbles, the shine of clean glass. Sweeping the floor becomes a meditation. Walking to the store becomes a pilgrimage. Presence reveals that no task is too small to be sacred. A powerful way to cultivate presence is through mindful breathing. You do not need to force or control the breath. Simply notice it. Inhale, exhale. Each breath is an anchor, drawing you back from distraction into the here and now. Another practice is mindful walking. As you take each step, feel the contact of your feet with the earth. Say silently, I have arrived. I am home. Suddenly, the ordinary act of walking becomes an act of freedom. Presence is not about perfection. The mind will wander, again and again. That is not failure. That is practice. Each time you notice the wandering, you gently bring the mind back. Presence is not about never leaving. It is about always returning. Over time, the habit of returning grows stronger, and presence becomes your natural state. Presence also prepares the heart for compassion. When you are lost in distraction, you miss the subtle signals of another's suffering, a tremble in the voice, a shadow in the eyes. But when you are present, you notice. You respond with kindness because you are here enough to see what is needed. Presence opens the door to love and action. In the end, presence is not something you achieve once and keep forever. It is a choice made again and again. Each breath offers the invitation. Each step is a chance to return. Presence is not far away. It is always as close as this moment. And as we go deeper, we will see that presence is not only a practice for peace, but a way to transform suffering itself. To stay present in the midst of pain, to meet hardship with awareness, is to turn even life's darkest moments into opportunities for freedom. That is the deeper power of presence, and it is where we now turn. Presence becomes most powerful not in moments of ease, but in moments of challenge. Anyone can be present on a sunny day, walking through a quiet park. But can you remain present when the storm comes, when anger rises, when grief breaks your heart, when uncertainty clouds your mind? This is where presence reveals its true strength. Imagine sitting with grief after the loss of a loved one. The mind wants to escape, to numb itself, to turn away. But presence asks you to stay. It does not demand that you feel good. It invites you to feel real. You breathe into the ache in your chest, the heaviness in your body, the tears welling in your eyes. You do not run from them. You do not add stories like, "I will never recover." You simply stay. In that staying, the grief becomes bearable. It still hurts, but you are no longer alone with it. You are present with it. And that presence itself is healing. The same is true with fear. Fear often grows monstrous when left in the shadows. But when you turn toward it with presence, it shrinks. You notice the racing heartbeat, the quick breath, the tension in the stomach. You say, "This is fear." You breathe with it. Allow it to rise and fall. Fear loses its power when it is seen clearly. Presence is the light that dissolves shadows. Presence also transforms anger. Left unchecked, anger becomes destructive. It lashes out in words and actions we later regret. But when you meet anger with presence, you notice its heat before it erupts. You feel the tightness in your fists, the pounding in your chest. You breathe into it. You recognize, this is anger arising, and in that moment of recognition, you create space. You do not need to act on anger. You can simply be present with it. Often, just this presence is enough for anger to dissolve on its own. To cultivate this kind of presence, it helps to practice daily in small ways. When you drink a glass of water, notice the coolness, the taste, the way it refreshes your body. When you wait at a red light, instead of rushing in thought, feel your breath. When someone speaks, listen fully without planning your reply. These small acts train the mind to return, again and again, to know. Then, when larger storms come, presence is already your habit. Another way to deepen presence is to embrace silence. In a world full of noise, constant notifications, endless chatter, silence feels uncomfortable at first. But silence is not empty. It is full of presence. When you sit quietly, without reaching for distraction, you begin to hear the subtle rhythms of life, the beating of your heart, the wind outside, the stillness between sounds. In silence, presence deepens naturally. Presence also reveals impermanence. When you stay with any sensation long enough, you see it change. The itch fades, the ache softens, the breath shifts. This insight is liberating. It shows you that no pain is forever, no joy eternal. Presence does not cling to what is pleasant or fight what is unpleasant. It simply stays, allowing everything to rise and fall in its own time. And presence is contagious. When you live with presence, others feel it. A friend who sits with you fully, without distraction, gives you the gift of being seen. A leader who listens with presence inspires trust. A parent who plays with presence gives their child memories of love that last a lifetime. Presence radiates peace, and others are drawn to it. Still, presence requires courage. It asks you to stop running, to meet life as it is. Many avoid presence because they fear what they will find: old wounds, deep loneliness, unspoken truths. But here is the paradox. When you finally stop running, you discover that what you feared was not as solid as you imagined. The wound softens when held with presence. The loneliness eases when witnessed. The truth, though painful, becomes lighter when faced directly. Presence is not escape, it is the beginning of true healing. Ultimately, presence is not something to add to your life. It is the essence of life itself. The present moment is all you ever truly have. The past exists only as memory, the future only as imagination. When you live absent from now, you live absent from life. When you live in presence, you live fully. And so the power of presence is this: it gives you back your life. Not the life you wish for, not the life you remember, but the life that is here, breathing, beating, unfolding. Presence allows you to taste joy, to meet sorrow, to love deeply, and to live freely. As this chapter ends, hold this simple truth: presence is always available. No matter how distracted you have been, no matter how many years have passed in absence, you can return now. With one breath, you are here. With one step, you are home. And now, having learned the art of presence, we turn to a truth that presence makes possible: the cultivation of compassion. Because when you are present with your own suffering, you naturally open to the suffering of others. And in that opening, love expands without limit. Compassion is the natural flowering of presence. When you are truly here, with your own heart open and steady, you cannot help but feel the pulse of life in others. You sense their joys, their struggles, their hidden wounds. Compassion is not pity. It is not superiority. It is the simple recognition that just as you suffer and long for peace, so do all beings. And from that recognition grows the wish to ease their suffering, to walk alongside them with kindness. In modern culture, compassion is often misunderstood. Some see it as weakness, as softness in a world that rewards hardness. Others confuse it with sacrifice, believing that to be compassionate is to give until nothing is left. But true compassion is neither weakness nor depletion. It is strength rooted in love. It is a flame that warms without burning out, because it is fueled not by exhaustion, but by connection. The seed of compassion begins with yourself. Many people try to be kind to others while being merciless toward themselves. They speak words of encouragement to friends, but words of judgment to their own hearts. This imbalance cannot last. If you cannot turn compassion inward, your kindness outward will always run dry. Self-compassion is the ground from which all other compassion grows. To practice self-compassion, start with awareness. Notice the harsh voice of self-criticism. Notice how often you replay mistakes, punish yourself with impossible standards, or deny yourself rest. Then ask, would I speak this way to someone I love? If not, why speak this way to yourself? Replace the harsh voice with gentleness. I am human. I am learning. I deserve kindness too. At first, this feels unnatural, but with practice, it becomes the natural way of relating to yourself. From self-compassion, the heart expands outward. You begin to see others not as obstacles or competitors, but as fellow travelers. You notice the cashier at the store, tired after a long day. You notice the colleague hiding anxiety behind a smile. You notice the stranger on the train, lost in thought, perhaps grieving or longing. Compassion does not require you to fix their lives. It asks only that you see them, honor their humanity, and wish them well. One simple practice is the silent offering of compassion. As you walk through your day, you can repeat quietly in your mind, "May you be happy. May you be safe. May you be free from suffering." You do not need to say it aloud. The words themselves soften your heart and shift how you move in the world. Suddenly, every encounter becomes an opportunity for kindness. Compassion also transforms conflict. Imagine an argument with a friend. Your mind focuses on being right, on proving your point. But compassion asks a different question. What pain lies beneath their words? Maybe their anger hides fear. Maybe their harshness hides hurt. When you look with compassion, the fight changes. You stop needing to win and start wanting to understand. Compassion turns enemies into teachers and conflict into connection. This does not mean compassion is always easy. Sometimes people hurt you. Sometimes they act with cruelty or indifference. Compassion does not mean tolerating abuse or excusing harm. It means recognizing that even those who cause harm are caught in their own suffering, their own ignorance, their own cycles of becoming. You can hold compassion for them while still protecting yourself, while still setting boundaries. Compassion is not blind, it sees clearly, and still chooses kindness. Science now confirms what ancient wisdom has always known. Compassion heals. Acts of kindness release chemicals in the brain that reduce stress and increase well-being. Compassion strengthens the immune system, lowers blood pressure, and even lengthens life. But beyond biology, compassion heals the soul. It dissolves loneliness, bridges divides, and restores a sense of belonging. To live without compassion is to live in isolation. To live with compassion is to remember that we are part of one human family. Compassion also extends beyond humans. When you see the suffering of animals, when you witness the destruction of the earth, compassion calls you to act with care. It widens the circle of concern beyond yourself and your community to all beings, all life. This is not sentimental. It is the recognition that your life is woven into the fabric of all life. To harm another is to harm yourself. To care for another is to care for yourself. And so, the practice of compassion is not an occasional act. It is a way of living. It begins with small gestures, a smile, a kind word, a listening ear. It grows into larger actions, forgiveness, generosity, service. It becomes the thread that runs through every part of life. Compassion is not separate from wisdom. It is wisdom expressed in love. As this journey unfolds, the question arises, how do we sustain compassion in a world that can be so harsh? How do we keep the heart open when suffering feels endless? The answer lies in learning practices that renew compassion, that protect it from burnout, and that transform it into a steady flame rather than a fleeting spark. That is where we now turn. To sustain compassion, you must learn to balance the heart. Too often, people confuse compassion with rescuing. They believe they must carry the weight of everyone else's suffering on their own shoulders. But this quickly leads to exhaustion, resentment, and collapse. True compassion is not about drowning in another's pain. It is about standing steady beside them, offering presence and care without losing your own ground. Imagine a firefighter rushing into a burning building. He brings water to the flames, not more fire. If he were to panic and add fuel, both he and the trapped people would perish. Compassion works the same way. To truly help, you must bring calm, clarity, and love, not more chaos. That is why self-care is essential to compassion. Without it, your efforts will burn out. With it, your compassion becomes sustainable. A simple practice is to pair compassion with breathing. When you encounter suffering, your own or another's, breathe in gently, acknowledging the pain. Breathe out, offering kindness, calm, and release. This practice, sometimes called compassion breathing, prevents you from being overwhelmed. It allows you to touch suffering without being consumed by it. Another sustaining practice is gratitude. Compassion can feel heavy if you only focus on suffering. But when you balance it with gratitude, when you notice joy, beauty, and kindness, the heart stays light. You see not only pain, but also resilience. You recognize that even in hardship, people laugh, love, and endure. Gratitude fuels compassion with hope. Forgiveness is another deep expression of compassion. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting or excusing harm. It means releasing the burden of hatred from your own heart. It means saying, "I will not let your actions imprison me." Forgiveness frees both giver and receiver. Sometimes the other person never changes, never apologizes. But your forgiveness still liberates you. It is one of the highest forms of compassion because it recognizes the humanity, even in those who fail us. Compassion also requires boundaries. Many believe that to be compassionate is to say yes to every request, to give endlessly without limit. But true compassion understands that boundaries protect love. Saying no at times allows you to say yes with sincerity. Setting boundaries ensures that your compassion is clear, not clouded by resentment. It is not unkind to protect your energy. It is wise. Compassion without boundaries becomes martyrdom. Compassion with boundaries becomes sustainable love. In moments of despair, when suffering in the world feels overwhelming, remember that compassion need not fix everything. It begins with small acts. You cannot end all wars, but you can bring peace to your home. You cannot feed every hungry person, but you can feed one. You cannot heal every broken heart, but you can listen deeply to the one before you. Compassion multiplies through these small gestures, spreading further than you can see. There is a story of a monk walking along a beach covered with stranded starfish. A young boy picked them up one by one, throwing them back into the sea. The monk said, "There are too many. You cannot save them all." The boy picked up another starfish, tossed it into the waves, and said, "I saved that one." Compassion works this way, not by solving everything at once, but by making a difference where you can. Moment by moment, compassion also means extending kindness to those who seem least deserving. It is easy to care for those who are kind, grateful, or similar to you. The challenge is to care for those who oppose you, who frustrate you, who act from ignorance. Yet these are the people who need compassion most, because they are caught most tightly in suffering. This does not mean tolerating harm or abandoning justice. It means recognizing that even those who harm are human beings shaped by their own wounds. To meet them with compassion is to break cycles of hatred. Perhaps the greatest practice of compassion is simply to be present. Too often, we rush to offer advice, solutions, or distractions. But what most people long for is not fixing, they long to be seen. To sit with someone in silence, to hold their hand, to say with your presence, "I am here with you," is one of the deepest gifts you can offer. Compassion is not always about doing. Sometimes it is simply about being. As you live this way, compassion becomes less of an effort and more of a state of being. It flows naturally, like a river that nourishes everything along its path. And just as a river does not choose where to flow, watering weeds and flowers alike, compassion does not discriminate. It sees all beings as worthy of care. And so, the practice of compassion teaches us that love is not limited. The more you give, the more it grows. The more you open, the wider the heart becomes. Compassion is the force that heals division, softens fear, and restores hope. It is the answer to loneliness, the medicine for hatred, the bridge across suffering. As this chapter closes, let this truth settle in you. Compassion is not separate from who you are. It is your deepest nature, waiting to be lived. And when compassion becomes the ground of your life, every step, every word, every act becomes an offering of love. From here, the journey moves toward the final chapter, the integration of all these teachings' presence, letting go, emptiness, compassion into daily life. The question is no longer what freedom is, but how to live it, moment by moment, in the world as it is. That is where we now turn dot all along this journey. We have explored suffering and freedom, clinging and letting go, presence and compassion. Now the question becomes, how do we live these truths, not just understand them? How do we walk in the world with freedom and joy, even as challenges arise? The answer is not a single technique or philosophy. It is a way of being. Living with freedom and joy means embodying the wisdom of the path in every breath, every choice, every relationship. Freedom begins inside. Many imagine it as external, a perfect job, a secure future, a life without problems. But external conditions are never permanent. They rise and fall like waves. True freedom is not found in changing the world, but in transforming how you meet it. It is the freedom to feel anger without being consumed, to face loss without being shattered, to experience joy without clinging. It is the freedom to live with an open hand instead of a clenched fist. Joy, too, is not dependent on circumstances. Many believe joy will come only when life aligns perfectly, when the debts are paid, the body is healthy, the relationship smooth. But life rarely aligns that way. Joy arises not from perfection, but from presence. It arises when you taste your tea fully, when you listen to a bird sing, when you share laughter with a friend. Joy is found not in someday, but in today, not in what you achieve, but in how you show up for what is already here. To live with freedom and joy is to integrate presence into daily life. This does not mean escaping responsibilities. It means meeting them with awareness. When you work with your whole attention. When you rest without guilt. When you love fully, without distraction. This integration makes even ordinary moments sacred. Consider a person washing clothes. Without presence, it feels like drudgery. But with presence, each movement becomes meditation. The rhythm of water, the touch of fabric, the breath rising and falling. Freedom is not found by running from such tasks, but by entering them fully. Joy is not reserved for holidays or special events. It is hidden in the fabric of everyday life. Living with freedom and joy also means embracing impermanence. Instead of fearing change, you welcome it as the essence of life. You savor good times while they last, and you face hardships knowing they too will pass. You stop clinging to permanence and instead dance with the flow. This dance is lighter, freer, more alive than any rigid plan could ever be. Another key is cultivating gratitude. Gratitude is the doorway to joy. It shifts your focus from what is missing to what is present. Each morning, you can pause and notice 3 simple things: the warmth of sunlight, the gift of breath, the presence of someone you love. Gratitude does not deny suffering. It balances it. It reminds you that even in difficulty, life offers countless small blessings. When gratitude becomes a habit, joy follows naturally. Living this way also means practicing compassion as a daily rhythm. When you encounter suffering, you do not turn away. You meet it with kindness, sometimes in action, sometimes in silence, sometimes simply in holding space. Compassion transforms how you see the world. You stop dividing it into us and them, good and bad. You see the shared humanity in all. This vision itself is joy because it dissolves loneliness and separation. Freedom and joy also require courage. They ask you to step beyond fear, beyond the need for control, to forgive when you could resent, to release when you could cling, to love when you could close off. Each of these choices feels risky, but each one deepens your freedom. Joy does not come from playing it safe. It comes from living fully, even in the face of uncertainty. Imagine a woman walking through a difficult season. She loses her job, her health falters, relationships strain. From the outside, joy seems impossible. But inside, she practices presence. She breathes through fear. She remembers impermanence. She finds gratitude in small moments, a warm meal, a kind word, the beauty of the sky. She does not deny her suffering, but she does not let it define her. Slowly, she discovers a joy deeper than circumstance, a freedom untouched by loss. This is what it means to live the teachings, not just study them. And so, freedom and joy are not distant goals. They are available now. They are not found by escaping life, but by entering it fully. They do not require perfection, but presence. They do not require control, but letting go. They do not require isolation, but compassion. As we continue, we will see how to sustain this way of living, not as a temporary state, but as an ongoing practice. Because freedom and joy are not trophies to win. They are paths to walk, step by step, for the rest of your life. To sustain freedom and joy, you must recognize that they are not moods to chase, but ways of living. They are cultivated through practice, through daily choices, through the steady rhythm of awareness. Just as a garden flourishes when tended each day, freedom and joy grow when you nurture them with presence, gratitude, and compassion. One way to sustain this life is through mindfulness in ordinary moments. When you walk, walk with awareness of your steps. When you eat, savor each bite. When you speak, choose words with care. These small acts are not trivial. They are the threads that weave a life of freedom. Without mindfulness, even joyful moments slip unnoticed. With mindfulness, even simple tasks shine with meaning. Another sustaining practice is letting go of comparison. Much of our suffering arises not from what we lack, but from comparing ourselves to others. We measure our worth by their achievements, their appearances, their successes. But comparison is a thief of joy. Living with freedom means releasing the need to measure yourself against anyone. You recognize that your path is unique, that your worth is not dependent on comparison. In this release, joy returns. Living with freedom and joy also requires embracing uncertainty. The mind longs for control, for certainty about the future. But life is never certain. Illness comes, jobs change, relationships shift. To demand certainty is to live in constant anxiety. To embrace uncertainty is to live with openness. You face each day not with fear, but with curiosity. What will life bring today? How can I meet it with presence and love? This openness itself is freedom. Resilience is another fruit of living this way. Resilience does not mean avoiding hardship. It means meeting hardship without breaking. When you know that suffering is impermanent, when you trust that joy can return, you become like bamboo, flexible, bending with the storm without snapping. This resilience allows you to keep living with joy even in difficult times. Community is also vital. Freedom and joy are strengthened when shared. Surround yourself with people who value presence, kindness, and growth. Together, you remind one another of the path. A kind word from a friend, a shared moment of silence, a group meditation, all of these sustain your practice. Joy multiplies when given away. Freedom deepens when walked together. Generosity is another expression of freedom. When you give, whether it is time, attention, or resources, you loosen the grip of clinging. You remind yourself that joy is not in hoarding, but in sharing. Generosity turns life into a circle of abundance. What you give returns to you in unseen ways. It is not a loss, but an expansion. To live with freedom and joy also means remembering the larger perspective. You are part of something vast, a universe of stars, an earth of countless beings, a flow of life that stretches beyond your lifetime. When you hold this perspective, small worries shrink. You still care for daily responsibilities, but you no longer drown in them. You see your life as both precious and spacious, both intimate and vast. This vision brings peace. Imagine a man walking home after a long day. Normally, he would rush, lost in thought about tomorrow. But today, he practices presence. He notices the evening sky painted with color. He feels the cool air on his skin. He hears the laughter of children in the distance. Gratitude rises in his heart. Nothing in his external life has changed. His job is still stressful. His bills still waiting. But inside, he feels free. This is living with freedom and joy, not waiting for perfect conditions, but finding peace in the life already here. As you live this way, joy becomes steady, not fragile. It no longer depends on constant success or ideal circumstances. It rests in the simple fact of being alive, breathing, connected. Freedom becomes natural, not forced. It is no longer a distant dream, but the quiet strength of each day. And so, living with freedom and joy is not about escape. It is about engagement. It is about showing up fully for life, with presence, with compassion, with gratitude, with courage. It is about living so that every moment, even the hard ones, becomes part of the path to awakening. As this final chapter draws to a close, remember, the teachings are not meant to stay in books or in words. They are meant to be lived. Freedom and joy are not beyond your reach. They are within you, waiting in this very breath. And so we come to the end of this journey together. Yet in truth, the journey never ends. Each day, each moment, is a chance to begin again. Each breath is an invitation to freedom. Each step is an opening to joy.